talking about time and balance today, and one particular time, or actually date, I want to share with you is December 25th, 1980. That date will go down in my personal history as one of the biggest Christmas gift disappointments ever. We have a tradition when I was growing up where I grew up on the farm in rural Ohio, and we lived a mile away from my grandparents, and we would go to their house. All of the children on my dad's side of the family, there were our family and two others, we would go to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and we would open gifts, and many times they would have a special gift for the families. And so December 25th, 1980, we went over to their house and we're opening gifts, and we come to the special gift. And there are three of them laid out. Two look identical. One is different. Two are these sort of large cube-shaped boxes. We don't know what's in there, but the excitement and the anticipation is building. And so Uncle Bob and Aunt Diane, they go and they open their box, and inside is a color television with wireless remote. We go to the next family, Uncle John and Aunt Carol, and they've got kids about the same age as my brother and I, and they tear into the large cube-shaped box, and they open it, and color television with wireless remote. And we come to the third box that is short and long and rectangular, and my brother runs up to it, he tears it open, and it is not a color television with wireless remote. We didn't know what it was. It was like this big piece of metal, cylindrical metal. Dad explained later, after the tears were wiped and all of those kinds of things, that out on the farm we got our water from a well, just a big cylindrical hole in the ground, and you had to have a pump to pump the water out, and ours had broken, and it was expensive to replace, and Grandma and Grandpa had gifted us with this new pump. And Dad explained to me that it might not seem exciting, but it was necessary. And I left that conversation utterly convinced that he was correct about half of that. Now, I share that story because I wonder if my experience of the anticipation and the disappointment might relate to the experience of the ancient Hebrews, the Israelites, about 2,600 years ago. Did I do that math right? It was about 1400 BC, however many years ago that is, because they had been slaves in Egypt. They came out into the Sinai wilderness, and that they were at the base of Mount Horeb. And they know that God is there because there's a dark cloud over the mountain and smoke, and there's thunder and lightning, and Moses goes up onto the mountain to talk to God. They're headed towards Israel, where they're going to become a nation, and God has given them a mission. They're going to be a blessing to the world, and God has promised them along with that mission that they're going to be blessed, but they're not there yet. They've left slavery, they've got the national identity and the mission coming, but right now they're out in the wilderness, and this is where God is shaping their character as a nation. And part of that is done through a legal code. And so Moses is going up onto this mountain in the presence of God, and he's getting the laws of the people. And I can imagine standing there at the foot of the mountain with the anticipation building, wondering about, what are these laws going to be that are going to shape us so that we can fulfill the mission, but also enable the promise, and what's it going to be, and what's it going to be? And Moses comes down, and he starts telling the people what the laws are. And in fact, God's even got like a top 10 list. The 10 Commandments, and Moses starts out and he says, well, God is telling us that there are no other gods. There's just the one God, and we worship that God exclusively. And, maybe if I'm standing there, I'm thinking, okay, I can see that. That sounds intriguing, better than what they had in Egypt and what they have where we're going, I've heard. And so that sounds pretty good. And he's going on, and there's a second commandment and a third commandment, and then they get to the fourth one. And boy, does it sound good. Moses starts out reading this. It's recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 12. It says, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. Hallelujah! Yes! I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I'm just imagining if I'm there, I'm like nudging my buddies. I'm saying, this is going to be awesome. We're going to go to the tent and we're going to send the slaves out to do the work and they're going to bring us food and we're just going to eat. And I didn't watch sports. Maybe we're going to play sports out in the wild. Who knows? We can do anything we want because we rest and we worship and that's all we got to do. It sounds great. But then Moses took a deep breath and he kept going. There was more to it. And when he kept going, he said, you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Well, that would kind of temper my excitement a little bit. Because yes, I get to rest, but so does everybody else, and that's going to have some implications. If we want to eat on that Sabbath day, then that means earlier in the week we're going to have to make special preparations to be able to eat. If the slaves can't be used for anything and they get to rest, that means somebody's going to have to take care of the animals and the herds and the flock, and we're going to have to make preparations ahead of time to make sure that they're fed and cared for. It's just going to take a lot of work to be able to rest. And maybe it doesn't seem like it's really worth all that. Maybe if we did some other things, especially if we could get other people to work for us, that could seem a lot more like relaxing and getting us in a holy place where we could be the people God calls us to be, I might think. And if you fast forward to today, I've tried this Sabbath rest kind of thing, and I get that. It sounds great, but then you start thinking about, well, okay, but if I'm not making anybody else work, well, I can't go shopping, and I can't go eating out, and I can't do the sports leagues for my kids, and I can't watch sports because that would be somebody working. And as soon as everybody gets to rest, it starts to become complicated. And if all I'm doing is resting and worshiping, I can imagine that could even get boring. And it just seems to maybe there is a better way, and maybe it was just an off day for God. He had already, he'd gotten 3, that was pretty good, but by 4, maybe just kind of an off day, and maybe that was for people back then. Who knows what God was thinking. That there must be a better way. And so people have been searching for a better way to find wholeness and balance. And one of the places that as a culture we tried was through stuff. If we really wanted to be happy and whole and fulfilled, if we could just get enough cool stuff, that might do it. And so, as a culture, we tried that for a while, and some people still get caught up in trying that. There's, now scientists are getting into it, and they're saying, well, what really makes people happy? Because they kind of notice that the stuff is cool for a while, but then it fades, and then you need more stuff and bigger stuff, and so it's kind of a treadmill, and so maybe that's not the best. And so what scientists have come up with is that what it really is about is keeping busy. And now that's going to seem a little crazy on the surface because most of us are overly busy already. But here's what they're saying. Maybe we're busy with the wrong things. If we could just pick the right things, then maybe all that busyness would turn to fulfillment and joy and relaxation and health and wholeness. And so I want to read you a quote. This is from Forbes.com, where they were reporting on some of this research. They said, recent research from San Francisco State University found that people who spent money on experiences rather than material items were happier, felt the money was better spent. The thrill of purchasing things fades quickly, but the joy and memories of experiences, from epic adventures to minute encounters, can last a lifetime. And so the current sort of cultural and scientific wisdom is that if we want to have balance in our time, it's not about necessarily trying to cut back our activity. It's about picking the right activity. And if we could just pick the right activity, maybe we would be fulfilled and joyful. Maybe we would be more centered. Who knows? Maybe we would be more spiritual, maybe in tune with the Spirit of God, able to bless others and feel blessings for ourselves. And so I've been kind of trying this. It was, we opened these new facilities back in January, very busy time leading up to that, very busy time after the new facilities opened. And so I was looking for some things to do that were different than church. And so I got a little more active in a scuba diving club that I was part of and did some scuba diving with them and picked up some. I'm an old IT guy, and so picked up some computer programming projects for hobby to do. Even been doing some exercising, and those things are fun. And I enjoy them when I'm doing them. I have found when I'm doing them, I'm also thinking about all the other stuff that isn't getting done and how much is still waiting, and it becomes a little bit hard to enjoy because it's so stressful because all of the activity, and now I've just added more activity into an already full life, and even though it's fun activity, it doesn't seem to be fulfilling the promise of what some of that research was saying about picking the right activity. And there is just a small little bit of me of wondering if maybe God actually knew what God was talking about in talking about rather than more activity or a different activity, but about rest. But I'm not quite ready emotionally and spiritually to go there yet because, well, when I really get down to it, I'm not sure that I trust God. I know that may seem odd to say, but, honestly, there's a little bit of me that sort of fears God. And not like the sort of healthy Old Testament, you must have the fear of God, which was about respect and awe, but the kind of fear of like, if I really create a place of worship and rest and silence, that might not work out well. Not only I may lose out on some activities that I enjoy, but what if in that silence and that worship, God somehow speaks into that and guides me to quit doing some things I really don't want to quit doing? Or ask me, oh my, to pick up a new activity that I don't have time for? Or what if God just gives me an insight into some part of my character that I really don't want to acknowledge and see and that I might have to change? All of that could happen if I create place for it, so I'm just going to keep busy and keep going because at heart I have this fear that it could go bad if I truly make place and space for the Spirit of God. Intellectually, I can acknowledge that's not a really healthy, good place to be. And so I've been kind of open to how could I get to a different place. And I read recently that for Christians, the cure or the solution to fear is not courage, but faith. To choose to trust God, risky as that might be, that's sometimes why they call it a leap of faith. To choose to trust that maybe the God who created me knows what I really need, even though it seems so countercultural and it seems so scary. To choose to trust that maybe God really does have my best interests at heart. To choose to trust that following God in an uncertain journey is going to have a destination that is worth getting to. Again, a little hard to go there, but I've met someone who has. She came and spoke at our church a few years ago. Her name is Jen Hatmaker. She had written a book called 7: An Experimental Mutiny Against Excess. She had looked at her life in all these different areas. She had picked 7 where there was just too much. Too much food, too much clothing, too much media, and finally too much stress. And so she took 1 month to focus on each of these 7 things, and she limited this excess to see what God would do with that space that God created. And when she came to the month on stress, she chose to limit her activities and to claim Sabbath worship. And this is what she wrote. This was either before she started and sort of working herself up to it or after that she had done it. But this is what she wrote in her book. She said, maybe this isn't just another spiritual task to wear us out. Perhaps God designed this as a gift, not an obligation. What if God understood our tendency to overwork and underrest? So he made it mandatory for believers to breathe, pause, pray, relax every week. Maybe Jesus meant it when he said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God ordained the Sabbath for us, not as just another requirement from us. Maybe that's true. Maybe God knew what God was talking about. Maybe God knew what we needed. Maybe God knew that there's this great mission out for all of us to be a blessing to others, and this great promise that we would be blessed. And to achieve that, part of it required a spiritual discipline of rest and worship. But it would take faith to claim that. And I'm not going to stand before you and say that my faith is big enough to go from where I am now to carving out an entire day of no work and no necessitating anyone else to work. But I am going to do something small that I think is on the path to that, and I want to invite you to join me. What I want to commit to do today and invite you to join me is for the next 7 days to take 5 minutes each day, to set an alarm on my phone for the morning or the evening, and to take 5 minutes and be still, and to be quiet. Maybe pray to God. If I am really bold, instead of talking to God, I will shut up and listen and see what happens. I may not have the faith to go the whole way, but I can go that far. And I want to invite you to go with me this week. Back in December 25th of 1980, we opened that package, and I didn't know what it was, and I wouldn't had said I was excited at all about it at the time. It's only decades later I could look back and see that that piece of hardware was what brought water to the farm. It was what gave me water to drink and to bathe and to cook and to feed Rusty the dog and to water him and to do all of these things. And it did not seem very exciting at the moment. But let me tell you, it was necessary, and it was a blessing. Amen.